Did you guys hear the rumor? The rumor is that there is a Chick-fil-A coming to Union Gap. Yeah, anybody excited? Like, you don't understand what that means to me. Like Chick-fil-A. I am, like my family, when we travel, like we're traveling, and like our favorite spot to stop is Chick-fil-A. Give me some Christian chicken, right? That spicy chicken sandwich, then waffle fries, dipping it into that Chick-fil-A sauce. Oh my goodness. But the worst part about Chick-fil-A is you're driving, you're traveling, and you're coming home, and it's a Sunday. You know what happens, right? You're like, oh man, we're so hungry, where are we gonna eat? Oh, we'll pull into Chick-fil-A. And it's closed. Closed on Sunday. That's the worst part about Chick-fil-A. What's interesting though, they are famous for being closed on Sunday. The person who created Chick-fil-A is named Truett Cathy, and he started Chick-fil-A in 1946. And way in the very beginning, he had a decision to make. Sundays, oftentimes, are one of the busiest sales days of the week for fast food restaurants. But Truett had this conviction that Sundays belong to the Lord. And so before he opened his restaurant, before he knew whether his restaurant venture was going to be successful, he made that decision. We're going to be closed on Sundays. Well, 70 years later, 3,400 plus stores later, they are one of the most successful fast food franchises in the nation, and they are still closed on Sundays. You know, that's a great story. I love that story. And I think sometimes you hear a story like that, and does anybody else like feel something inside of you? Like, holy moly, like I wish I could take a stand like that. Like, I want my faith to influence the world around me, my city, my neighborhood, my coworkers. I want to do something that has an impact. Now, typically though, our decisions aren't quite like creating a national fast food restaurant. They're typically a little bit smaller, right? So what we do is we get the bumper sticker or the t-shirt, right? You know what I'm talking about? There's maybe some of those bumper stickers in the parking lot this morning. You know, that says, in case of rapture, this car will be unmanned. That's great. Or you see the bumper sticker and you know, this car cuts you off. And you're like, what? And you look at the bumper sticker and it's like, prayer changes everything. Except for all the dents on that car because they cut everybody off. You're like, come on, what's that about? Or maybe it's on social media. We're going to change the world on social media. And so like there becomes like this national tragedy, you know, something devastating that happens. And so what do is we do the little filter on our profile picture. Hey, look, I'm standing with you. You know, we post, thoughts and prayers for you. We do the little heart hand emojis. Oh, we're praying. We're praying. Has anybody's life ever been changed by a bumper sticker or a social media post? Now here's the thing. Like, we do these bumper stickers, we do these social media things, we do the prayer hands, and it's not a lie. Like, our heart is genuine. We care. We just think that we can influence other people from a distance. And here's the secret, that influence from a distance just does not influence. When we try and influence somebody from a distance, it's just a convincing impression of trying to make a difference. I think the question becomes, well, why is that our default mode? Why do we think, hey, I can just post something nice on social media, I can slap the Christian t-shirt on my shirt, I can put the bumper, why do we default to that thinking we're going to make a difference? It all comes down to proximity, because that feels so much safer. Because when you take proximity into broken places, when you take proximity into the world, it's dangerous. It's expensive. But here's the deal, a bumper sticker has never cost anybody a friendship. The prayer hands emoji on social media or in a text message has never caused anyone to be fired from their job or made an awkward conversation at the dinner table with your family gathering, right? But when you actually move towards the broken parts of the world, when you get close to controversy, to broken people, to people that don't think like you, it's dangerous. It's scary. In fact, Brian Stevenson wrote the book Just Mercy. He was an attorney who spent his career defending wrongly convicted and marginalized people. And early, before he became famous for what he's done, he was wrestling with this idea: should I pursue this type of law? It's messy, it's broken, it's difficult. Is it worth the risk? And his grandma said something to him this. His grandma said this: you cannot understand the most important things from a distance. You have to get close. I think about that for us. That many of us, our heart is genuine. We want to make a difference. We look around and we're like, hey, our world is crazy. I'd love for God to use me to help shape and redeem our city, to help shape and redeem our schools, to help shape and redeem our neighborhoods. But if we're going to be honest, it feels safer to try and do that from the sidelines, protected from what might happen if we got close. And I think the question for this morning we want to wrestle with: how do we actually stand out and make a godly influence in the crazy world around us? We started a series a week or two ago called Light in the Shadows. And the whole, the whole idea of this series is that God has called us as Christians not out of dark and broken places. He's called us to be a joyful, faithful presence in the midst of dark and broken places. So today we're looking in Daniel chapter 1. Daniel chapter 1 is a fascinating story, one of my favorite stories in the entire scriptures. Daniel is a teenager. He's probably like 15 to 17 years old. He's like these kids that are going to go and sell you some cupcakes so they can go off to camp, right? That's what we're looking at. He's a teenager when Nebuchadnezzar comes into Jerusalem, conquers Jerusalem, and hauls the best and the brightest young men from Jerusalem to be reprogrammed in Babylon. And so Daniel and his three friends, they are gifted kids, they are good-looking kids, they come from important families. They're the exact kind of people that King Nebuchadnezzar is looking to reprogram to make them leaders within Babylon. And so Daniel and his friends get enrolled in this 3-year intensive Babylonian education. They're going to be consumed with everything Babylon, language and culture and religion. In fact, one of the things that happens is King Nebuchadnezzar, he strips them of their names that had any reference to God, and he renames them with these Babylonian gods, right? This isn't cruelty, this is strategy. Nebuchadnezzar doesn't want captives, he wants converts to Babylonians' world, to Babylonians' way of living, to the way that Babylon operates. And what's interesting is in Daniel chapter 1, Daniel goes along with it until we get to verse 8. Our message today is called Different in Babylon. And point number 1 for us this morning is Daniel was resolved before the crisis. In fact, look at this, verse 8. It says, Daniel resolved that he would not defile himself with the king's food and wine that he drink. I love this word, resolved. Resolved means that he had already settled in his mind before the moment of testing, which is significant because I think sometimes I read this story and you're like, Daniel's in the lunch line and he's like, no, I don't want some of that. But that's not the case. That's not what's happening. Daniel, before the food ever shows up, before he ever got in the lunch line, Daniel had already made a decision. He already resolved in his heart, I'm going to honor God. I'm not going to eat this. Now, again, one of the things as I'm reading scripture, I want to ask questions. And I think one of the questions we ask is why does Daniel draw a line with food? Right? I mean, think about all the other stuff that's happened. Why didn't Daniel be like, no, you can't rename me Balthazar. I'm going to be called Daniel because that references my God. He doesn't draw a line there. He doesn't draw a line into, well, you're going to force me to go to this Babylonian educational institution and learn everything. But he doesn't draw a line and say, I'm not going to do that. That takes me away from God. I'm not going to do your Babylonian education. Why does Daniel draw the line on food? Well, in Babylon, they had these 8 temples to these various gods. And these false gods were gods that the king Nebuchadnezzar actually personally fed. So as you think about the king's kitchen, all the food in the king's kitchen would have first been offered to these false gods as an act of worship before that food ever got to the table with humans. And so as Daniel's looking at this food, this meal is not just a menu choice. This food is a participation in a liturgy. It's a participation in worship to anyone other than the one true God. See, this isn't about nutrition or health or vegetables. It's about worship. Daniel had resolved, I will worship no one other than the one true God. And here's what I think this means for us. Daniel was selective about what he fought against in Babylon. There were some things that Daniel was willing to let go. He let go his name. He let go of his education path. He let go of his path, of his career path, because these were not hills to die on. He saved his resolve for what mattered most. And here's the key to this whole first point. Is Daniel resolved before the pressure showed up through the test, right? By the time the food got there, Daniel had made a decision weeks or months earlier. And ultimately, that is where the victory happened. And it's so significant because for most of us, we live in the opposite way. We're going to fight every cultural skirmish as a hill to die on. Oh, well, I'm going to fight against this. I'm going to push against that. And then what happens is because we're always pushing against these things, we get flat-footed on the things that matter most because we have not decided in advance. And in these major moments, when we're tested, when we're tempted, they rarely give us time to think and decide well. Usually, it only gives us enough time to choose what we've already decided. Which is why it's so significant that Daniel made this decision resolved before the crisis hit. But Daniel's resolve was not the only part of this story. There's going to be this conviction with wisdom. Because when you don't have wisdom with your conviction, oftentimes you produce a mess instead of faithfulness. So number 2 for us this morning is Daniel's going to hold the line while maintaining the relationship. Now, again, like if we were to picture this, if this was a Hollywood movie, what would we picture Nebuchadnezzar, or what would we picture Daniel doing? I'm like Nebuchadnezzar. I can't get names right. I'm like, Daniel, you're going to storm into Nebuchadnezzar's throne room, and you're going to announce your objections. No way I'm going to eat your stinking food, right? Well, he's going to draw a hard line. He's going to file an online petition to boycott the king's lunchroom. He's going to publicly denounce anybody who eats from the king's table. But that's not what happens. Second half of verse 8, it says, therefore, Daniel asked the chief of the eunuchs to allow him not to defile himself. Daniel goes to the chief official and he asks. He doesn't demand. He doesn't say, hey, you're wrong, let me tell you why. He asks. Because having a conviction does not mean you have to be a jerk. And the official responds, verse 10, and he says, listen, Daniel, I fear the king, because if you look worse than the other youth, you're going to endanger my head with the king. The official's like, bro, like if I let you break from the food and do your own vegetables and water, and you look worse than the others, the king might take my head. And Daniel, I'm not going to lose my head over your conviction. And I love this because Daniel doesn't dismiss the official's objection. He doesn't dismiss his fear. He doesn't say, well, you can't make me eat that food. I'm not going to do it. Because conviction that comes at the expense of someone else's head is something that Daniel is not going to tolerate. So Daniel proposes a test, a simple test. Verse 12, he says, for 10 days, let me and my friends eat nothing but vegetables and water. Then, verse 13, then compare us with the other youth, and then decide if you're going to make us eat from the king's diet. Daniel's plan is very simple. Give us 10 days. Let us choose our own food, vegetables. I don't know why he would do that, but he has a reason for it. It's like, let us choose our own food, 10 days, completely reversible, right? There's no risk to the official. He's not asking the official to trust his conviction. He's saying, listen, if you let me try this, you can test it and assess it. And you can assess whether my plan works or not. You can let the results speak for themselves. Again, I think this story is significant because so often as Christians, we get this completely backwards. Because what happens is when our conviction and the culture around us, when they collide, right? Our conviction and the culture, they collide. We assume there's typically two options. When our conviction and the culture collide, we assume, either we have to compromise or we come out swinging. We're going to burn the relationship. We're going to throw a tizzy fit. We're going to stomp our feet. We're going to throw a tantrum because you can't make me do that. That's against my conviction. But Daniel shows us a third option. Daniel holds the line while maintaining the relationship at the same time. Which is so fascinating to me because it's not the way that most of us would respond when our conviction and the culture come into this collision. Daniel does not want the official to lose his job, but he also doesn't want to lose his conviction. So wisdom finds a way for him to honor both. Let me ask you, what would this look like for you? What would it look like for you to hold your conviction while maintaining a relationship with people who view and think differently than you? This would be like a coworker or a friend who doesn't share your faith, and they're vocal about it. Oh, I can't believe you follow that God. I can't believe you go to church. This would be that family member who feels judged because you've got a moral boundary that they don't follow. When we find ourselves in that spot, we have a choice to make. We can compromise our conviction. We can cancel that person. Or with wisdom, we can figure out how to maintain our conviction while continuing to love that person. And I love this because Daniel, he doesn't respond in silence to the official. He doesn't lecture the official. Through wisdom and respect, he comes up with this low-risk, respectful proposal that allows him to hold his conviction while maintaining the relationship. Because honestly, anybody can refuse loudly. Anybody can protest and make a big old scene. It takes wisdom and respect to refuse something while staying in the room. And this is so significant for us because as we talk about wanting to have influence, we talk about wanting to make a difference in our city, in our world, in our community, we have to be in the room to make that difference. This is where we talked about last week about Jesus sitting at the table with sinners and tax collectors. Jesus had to hold this in, I have a conviction of who I am and what I stand for without getting myself kicked out of this table, right? There's a difference between staying safe at a distance and being different up close. Because Daniel would not win if he didn't stay at the table. Daniel knew, if I want influence, I have to remain at the table. Number 3 for us, this is great. There's going to be a turn because we're going to see that his difference begins to multiply. Verse 15 says, at the end of the 10 days, Daniel and his friends were better in appearance and fatter in flesh than all the young men who ate the king's food. I love this simple verse. Hey, Daniel told the official, give us a try, test it out, see how it works out. And at the end of the 10 days, God had honored the conviction and wisdom. It was obvious to the official that Daniel and his friends were healthier. And so he allowed them to keep that diet indefinitely. And so for 3 years, God is going to give Daniel and his friends success in their studies until they get to the end of the 3 years. They get to the end of the 3 years, kind of like getting ready for graduation. And Nebuchadnezzar gives them a final exam, the big final test, right? Covering everything about Babylon. We're talking about history and language and science and religion. The big final test. Nebuchadnezzar brings in Daniel and his friends. And verse 20, it says, "In every matter concerning wisdom and understanding that the king inquired of them, the king found Daniel and his friends 10 times better than all the magicians and enchanters throughout the kingdom." Did you hear that number? It wasn't they were slightly better. They were 10 times better. And again, I read the Bible and I want to ask questions. And I'm like, what's my takeaway? Man, we should just eat vegetables and drink water, right? Right? Forget that carnivore thing. Maybe vegetables and water are the secret to godliness and success. Oh yeah, we got to read the Bible. Verse 9, it says, God gave favor. God gave Daniel favor and compassion. Verse 17, God gave them learning and skill. You see, the Bible, the text, it points to God, not the diet. God is honoring Daniel's conviction and wisdom. God is blessing him in this regard. Now, I want to be a little bit careful here, because we can read a story like this and we can come to the wrong conclusion. We can come to the conclusion, hey, if I'm faithful to God, if I'm obedient and I hold my convictions and I maintain the relationship, if I am just faithful to God, then God will make me just like Daniel. I'll be attractive, I'll be smart, I'll be 10 times better than the people around me. Anybody gonna sign up for that? Yeah. And God could do that. But God is not promising that. Because, in fact, in just a couple chapters later, Daniel's friends, man, they're going to make a hard stand for their faith, just like Daniel. And instead of being rewarded, his friends are going to be thrown into a fiery furnace with no clue whether or not God is going to save them or not. Yet they tell everybody, hey, even if God doesn't save us, we still are going to hold our conviction. See, let me say this. I do believe that God honors our faithfulness. He blesses it. But it's not a reason to be faithful to God. God's not a vending machine. We aren't owed anything by God from our faithfulness. But oftentimes what happens is when we are faithful to Him, God shows up in these little ways. God begins to bless in these little ways. This looks like when you think about your life and you think about somebody who has always rolled their eyes when you start talking about God and you start talking about your faith. But what happens is over time, that person begins to call you whenever there's a crisis in your life. Why? Because that person has watched you stay the same person in good times and bad times. And they know there's something different about you. Do you understand that? That is what multiplication looks like. That God opens a door with somebody when the door was previously closed, because that person has watched your resolve over time. They've watched how you maintain the relationship, and they've noticed, man, there's something different about this person. I've got to know what it is. So I love this story. Daniel's got this resolve. Number one, Daniel had this resolve. Number two, Daniel maintained his conviction while maintaining the relationship. Number three, his difference multiplied, his influence. And number four, his difference is going to last for a lifetime. Because this last verse 21, is easy to skim over. Verse 21 says, Daniel remained there until the first year of King Cyrus. Now, this was not just a little footnote to end the chapter on and put a little tidy bow on it. Now, what that verse talked about is that there are 7 decades. There's 7 decades from when Daniel is taken out of Jerusalem to when King Cyrus becomes king. So Daniel didn't just hold this line for a couple days. Daniel didn't just hold this conviction for 3 years while he was in school. Daniel held this conviction for multiple kings, for an empire around him that he watched rise and fall around him. This resolve in verse 8 was not just a teenage moment of courage, that this was actually Daniel's way of life throughout his entire lifetime. And what's going to happen because of that? What's going to happen because of that is in the end, Daniel's given an incredible amount of influence all across Babylon. He's going to be put in a position of authority in the king's table, in the king's cabinet. And he's going to get this influence and power, not because he stood on the outside of Babylon, trying to stay safe, not because he blended in, but because Daniel was different within the middle of Babylon. God gave him an incredible amount of influence. This very conviction that could have gotten Daniel executed in the very beginning is what plants him in the center of the empire that gives him influence for 7 decades. In fact, here's our big idea for this morning, our summary of this passage, what it's all about. When you and I wonder that question, how do we make a difference in the world around us? We cannot make a difference. We cannot make an impact from a distance. But we make a difference by being different in Babylon, because that makes all the difference. I think I said that right. I should actually look. Being different in Babylon is what makes all the difference. And as we think, I know most of the people in this room, and I know our heart is, man, God, I want to make a difference. I want to impact. I want my faith to matter. I want to have an impact on our city. We love our city. Listen, we can't make a difference from a distance. We've got to be different in the middle of the city in order for us to make a difference. In fact, I was thinking, my son recently got engaged, and I was thinking about him going to the jewelry store, right? He goes to the jewelry store. When you go to a jewelry store, what do they do when they show you a diamond? You go to the jewelry store, and they take the black felt out. And they bring the diamond out, and they put the diamond on the piece of felt. Why? Because if you put a diamond in the midst of a bunch of other diamonds, it doesn't stand out, right? When you put a diamond in with a bunch of other diamonds, it invites comparison. It invites competition. It invites these funny little games that we play. But when you put a diamond in a dark backdrop, that diamond shines in brilliance. This is exactly why Daniel and his friends stood out. Because their backdrop of this secular, sinful, dark Babylon allowed their difference to shine enough for God to make an enormous impact in and through them. And I think about us saying, God, how can we make a difference in our city? How can we make an impact in our world, in our neighborhood? What do we need to do to be like Daniel? Our application points, 3. Number 1, we've got to be willing to stay in Babylon. In fact, this is the overarching principle for this entire sermon series, Light in the Darkness. As Christians, listen, we live in a crazy world. It would be so much easier to seclude ourselves and our families in the safety of people who are just like us. We'll just be in our little Christian bubble where it's safe. We're not going to worry about being exposed to the cruel world. We're not going to worry about influences changing our children. We're not going to worry about the temptations of the world overtaking us. It'd be so much easier for us to stay in our little bubble and just be safe. The light only shines in the midst of other lights. Our light is going to be lost. This is why I love Daniel chapter 1. It's so powerful. Because Daniel's resolve, hear this, Daniel's resolve was not to get away from evil Babylon. He didn't ask God and be like, God, can you just transfer me to someplace more Jewish, a little bit safer? No, Daniel stays in the middle of Babylon, right at the king's table. And it's at that place, at the king's table, that Daniel holds his conviction. I will worship no other God than God alone. Daniel's strategy is not to try and make an influence from a distance. Because if it was, then we don't have the rest of the book of Daniel, where we see Daniel and his friends having incredible influence. No, Daniel's power is 10 times better. His seat of influence at Nebuchadnezzar's table, it doesn't exist. If Daniel just said, oh, Babylon, it's too dangerous, I'm going to stay safe from it. Where's this place for you? Where's this place that you feel like you've retreated? You've backed out because it's hard, because it's dangerous, because it's going to cost something of you. Where is it that you need to re-engage? Because if diamonds are made to shine bright, where are you going to shine bright? We've got to be in the right places for us to make a difference. Number one, we've got to have this conviction we're going to remain in Babylon. Number two, we've got to decide your line before the crisis ever hits. This is all about this word resolve. Decide what it is you need to do now. Decide that line in the sand you're going to draw now. Before the crisis, before the temptation hits, what is it for you now? Maybe for you it's going to be honesty, right? It's going to be you making a decision that, hey, my words are going to carry integrity. I'm not going to fib to sound better. I'm not going to cut corners to advance faster. No, I'm going to walk with integrity and truthfulness. Maybe for you it's going to be, I'm going to choose faithfulness in my marriage. Because here's what I know. Nobody just falls into an affair overnight. It starts with a relationship that we've allowed to go further than it should. And so maybe for you, you've got to decide right now, this is the boundary lines I'm going to have in my marriage, so I'm not going to get myself in trouble. Maybe for you, I think this is real. Maybe for you, it's deciding what you're going to model for your kids. Because parents, we have choices to make. Are we going to fail and let our kids see us genuinely repent? Or are we going to fail and try and manage their perception of us instead? What is it for you? Again, these things, they're not decided well in the moment, which is why Daniel resolved ahead of time. I will worship God and God alone. What is it for you that you need to decide and resolve now before the crisis or the temptation ever comes? Last one for us this morning. We've got to be willing to hold our line with respect and wisdom. Daniel didn't just have this conviction. He had a plan on how to hold it. He went privately, not publicly. He went privately and he asked rather than announcing or demanding. And he proposed a small, reversible, wise plan, 10 days, that allowed Daniel to hold his conviction while maintaining the relationship. All of us are going to have moments when our convictions and someone else's expectations are going to collide. So the question is, what does it look like? What does it look like for you to maintain your conviction with respect and wisdom, maintaining the relationship? Listen, I love Daniel's story. But this is not just his story, this is our story as well. We as a church, we have a heart to impact our city, to impact our world. We have a heart to see our families be transformed. Listen, we cannot do it from a distance. It happens when we resolve to be different in the middle of Babylon without burning down the relationships in the process. In fact, Martin Luther King said this. He said, darkness cannot drive out darkness. Only light can do that. We don't push back the darkness in our community and our world by leaving the room it's in. We push back by staying in the middle of it and being different, unwilling to blend in. That's what Daniel did, and that's what we're invited to do today.